Welcome to the T1Determined Podcast, where we bridge the conversation of type 1 diabetes and endurance. I'm Joseph Anthony Marcello, a runner, a weightlifter, a mountaineer, and athlete. As someone living with T1D, I'm on a mission to uncover and share science-backed information that drives optimal performance and longevity. And as a storyteller, I'm here to explore and share incredible feats in T1D sports physiology. Let's tackle this together. Today, on the T1Determined Podcast, I dive into my personal story of climbing Mount Washington in New Hampshire alone in the heart of winter conditions, experiencing minus 40 degrees, which is the temperature point where Farenheight and Celsius are interchangeable. I read this story in the style of an audiobook, and though it has been over 4 years since I've accomplished this climb, I look back at blood glucose data, GPS tracking data, and archived records to try my best to provide you with accuracy of the real event. First, we will go through the introduction to the story, setting the scene on what drove me to attempt Washington alone in such treacherous conditions. Then, we will take a quick detour to discuss my recent research on growth hormone in type 1 diabetes. After that, we will get back to the adventure to experience subarctic temperatures together. This is a jam-packed episode with lots of actionable items. I'm excited for you to be on this adventure with me. As we build this podcast from the ground up and face every slope head-on, your support is crucial for our continued growth. Wherever you're listening, please share this episode and others with anyone you think might benefit. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and X at T1D_endurance, on Facebook at T1Determined, and visit our website, T1Determined.net. There, you'll find all our podcast episodes, blog posts, and details about our documentary projects, including our upcoming feature film, Low Blood Sugar at High Altitude. Before we dive in, a quick but vital disclaimer. I am not a medical doctor. The topics discussed and the recommendations shared by myself and our guests are personal experiences and not medical prescriptions. My aim is to foster a community where we can openly share therapy methods and management techniques that work for individuals. I believe comprehensive T1D education and well-rounded glucose management come from learning and listening to a multitude of experiences. You'll hear various approaches, but please remember that not every method or technique will work for everyone. Use this information in a way that best suits you. And always consult your healthcare team and medical professionals before making any changes to your daily routines, management, or therapies. I was 600 feet below the summit of Mount Washington. A bluebird day. 14 degrees Fahrenheit feels like 70 when the sun is beaming on reflecting snow. Hell, I passed someone on their way down simply in a t-shirt. Middle of January, and with the smell of sunscreen, I'm mistakenly reminded of a day at the beach. At this point in my life, I've done Washington before, multiple times, including once in winter. I was with a group then, and today, I'm alone. Mount Washington in New Hampshire is the tallest mountain in the Northeast, standing at 6,288 feet. This mountain is notoriously known for its bad weather, including the fastest wind speed recorded by humans, 231 miles per hour on April 12, 1934. Washington experiences intense storms year-round. In the middle of June, I've seen snow. Today, I'm on top of an insane amount of snow, but the winds are calm and there's no precipitation. The weather is perfect for climbing. However, my fluctuating blood sugars are not. At 1 p.m. on a bluebird January day, 600 feet below the summit of Mount Washington, a mountain so rare for calm weather, I made the calculated decision to turn around. I did not reach my goal of getting to the summit alone in winter as a T1D. This decision ate me alive. I knew I could get to that summit. I've done it so many times before. To do it alone in winter would finally prove my transformation to total independence as a type 1 diabetic. I didn't want to feel dependent on people for my life. I didn't want to feel dependent on medicine and doctor's offices for my life. I wanted total independence from top to bottom. And it killed me that I couldn't reach the top. I was on my way down to rock bottom. Why did I turn around? My blood glucose levels kept dropping and dropping no matter how much sugar I ate. The day was getting late. That last half mile held a lot of elevation gain. I was almost out of food, and my CGM alarm kept going off every 20 minutes, stating my bump up to 140 milligrams per deciliter or 7.8 millimoles per liter from my previous sugar hit was now back down to 70 or 3.9 and falling fast. At the end of the day, I knew I made the right decision to turn around. Going down became dangerous as well. Many things were going wrong all at once on top of my T1D. Before this solo expedition, I was all excited to use my new Scarpa mountaineering boots with my new Gravel crampons. One problem. I didn't know enough about my new gear to realize that the attachment style of the crampons did not fit the style needed for my boots. Essentially, the spikes that were keeping me from falling off the steep cliffside of Mount Washington was slipping and sliding around beneath my boots. Utter danger. Going down, I toppled quite a few times. That setting sun finally sent a reality check to what 14 degrees Fahrenheit really means. All snowy from the many plunges off trail, I was shaking with cold. This was also due to my pack being insanely heavy. Fear is a deterrent. From my massive amount of anxiety of doing this expedition alone, my pack weighed close to 70 pounds. Extra clothes to spend not one night, but 2 nights, and enough sugar to keep me running for days. A reverse effect happened because the weight of my pack made me work harder, pumping my heart faster, forcing me to intake more glucose throughout the day. And now, not only am I depleted of energy, with a concrete stomach of crappy sugar, I am now almost out of food as my blood glucose is totally not stable. No wonder why I was mentally and physically exhausted. No wonder why my blood glucose kept falling. The amount of physical work I had to put in to the elevation gain of Washington with 70 pounds on my back meant that my body was using up all of my carbohydrate reserves. Luckily, by the way down, my body began to flatten out, and I did not require as much resources as the way up. But knowing that winter darkness was near, I was cold, alone, and without the proper gear. I needed to get back to the base, Pinkham Notch, as fast and as safe as I possibly could. Stupid. Pure stupidity. An utter failure. I knew I made so many mistakes throughout the day, but that did not change the situation I now found myself in. Slow focus allowed for my safe return to the warm lodge. I heated my car up and drove more than 3 hours back home with my head hung low. This solo attempt on Mount Washington was a failure. The reason I classified it as a failure was because I did not summit due to elements that were in my control. Usually, I am not upset if I have to turn around for reasons beyond my control, if the weather is bad or the route contains too many hazards, etc. But this time, everything that went wrong was my fault. A heavy pack, fast-acting sugar, not the right fuel source, gear that didn't match. The one good decision I made was to turn around and not further risk my life. Yet, soon upon returning to the cushion of society, I found myself thinking about that summit. Alone in winter as a T1D. Suddenly, it became more important to me. I had to prove to myself that I could do it. I know what I did wrong, so I know how to change that into pieces that can go right. Sitting by my fireplace the next night, in a corny and ironic fashion, I vowed to turn my failure into a learning lesson. Before we start the story of my redemption expedition, let's talk about growth hormone in T1D. Full disclosure, this is my first time compiling data and research on a scientific concept to then be produced for a podcast. Our team conducted immense research, and we want to know how we did. Please let us know in the comments via social direct messaging or by emailing us. When it comes to science-backed information, we will always do our best to provide you with the most accurate information. And as we are learning with you, we will correct any mistakes we come across. That being said, we reviewed all information to be truthful, yet simplified. Please know that the process we are about to discuss is extremely complicated, and we broke it down for easier understanding. With that in mind, let's dive in. You probably associate growth hormone with, well, growth, especially in kids and teenagers. But for individuals living with type 1 diabetes, there's a fascinating and sometimes challenging relationship between their condition and this powerful hormone. Many T1Ds actually produce more growth hormone, or GH, than people without the condition. And while growth hormone is essential, too much of a good thing can lead to some significant long-term health concerns. To understand why growth hormone levels can be higher in type 1 diabetes, we first need to understand how growth hormone usually works. Our bodies have this incredibly intricate system called the growth hormone insulin-like growth factor 1 axis, or the GH-IGF-1 axis for short. It's a bit like a well-choreographed dance, or a feedback loop. Here's the simplified version. Your pituitary gland, a tiny but crucial gland at the base of your brain, releases growth hormone. Growth hormone then travels to your liver. The liver, in response, produces another hormone called insulin-like growth factor 1, or IGF-1. IGF-1 is important because it mediates many of growth hormone's effects, like promoting cell growth and regulating metabolism. But here's the clever part of the feedback loop. When IGF-1 levels are high, it sends a signal back to the pituitary gland, telling it to slow down on growth hormone production. It's like a thermostat. When it gets too warm, the AC kicks in. When it cools down, the AC eases off. Now, imagine what happens in type 1 diabetes. T1D is an autoimmune condition where the body's immune system attacks and destroys the beta cells in the pancreas that produce insulin, as I'm sure most of you are well aware. And insulin, it turns out, is absolutely crucial for this growth hormone feedback loop to work correctly, especially in the liver. Without enough insulin, particularly the insulin delivered directly to the liver via the portal vein, the liver becomes what we call growth hormone resistant. Think of it this way. Growth hormone is knocking on the liver's door, but the liver isn't opening it properly because it's missing the critical key, insulin. Because the liver isn't responding, it's not producing enough IGF-1. And if there isn't enough IGF-1, that stop signal isn't being sent back to the pituitary gland. So what does the pituitary do? It keeps pumping out more and more growth hormone, trying to get the liver to respond. This leads to what's known as growth hormone hypersecretion, essentially an excess of growth hormone in the bloodstream. This high growth hormone, combined with low IGF-1, is a feature of uncontrolled type 1 diabetes. In excess, especially in a chronic condition like T1D, this disrupted feedback loop and the buildup of growth hormone can contribute to several long-term health complications. Growth hormone is a counter-regulatory hormone, meaning it works against insulin's effects. The natural effects of growth hormone raise blood sugar, promote fat breakdown, and simply put, oppose insulin's effort to use carbohydrate sources. Again, this is simplified for our understanding of this conversation. While the effects of growth hormone are helpful in short bursts, like during exercise or fasting, chronic elevation in T1D can be detrimental. First, this can cause impaired glucose control. Since growth hormone promotes insulin resistance and increases the liver's production of glucose, it can make it even harder for individuals with T1D to manage their blood sugar levels. It's like trying to put out a fire while someone keeps adding fuel. Second, the elevated growth hormone is strongly implicated in microvascular complications, which are damage to the small blood vessels throughout the body. For instance, in diabetic nephropathy, which is kidney disease, growth hormone appears to have direct harmful effects on the specialized cells in the kidney called podocytes, contributing to kidney damage. Similarly, in diabetic retinopathy, which affects the eyes and can lead to blindness, high growth hormone and the resulting alterations in the GH-IGF-1 axis are believed to play a role. They can trigger processes like angiogenesis, which is the formation of new blood vessels, often abnormal and fragile, and can also lead to apoptosis, or programmed cell death, in retinal cells alongside the production of damaging reactive oxygen species. Third, while less directly studied for causing macrovascular disease in T1D, the mechanisms by which excess growth hormone contributes to macrovascular complications are highly relevant. Macrovascular complications include problems with larger blood vessels like heart disease and stroke. chronic elevation of GH can lead to insulin resistance and dyslipidemia, which is unhealthy cholesterol levels, and hypertension, meaning high blood pressure. These are all major risk factors for cardiovascular disease. So, if high growth hormone is a problem, how can T1Ds safely and properly bring those levels down without causing other imbalances? The cornerstone of managing elevated growth hormone in type 1 diabetes is, perhaps not surprisingly, optimal insulin therapy. The research clearly shows that when insulin is adequately replaced, the liver's resistance to growth hormone starts to reverse. As the liver begins to respond normally again, it produces more IGF-1, which then sends that crucial negative feedback signal to the pituitary, telling it to reduce growth hormone secretion. Studies have demonstrated that intensive insulin therapy can significantly improve GH binding protein levels and normalize elevated GH levels in individuals with type 1 diabetes. This means that for most type 1 diabetics, meticulous blood sugar control is the primary and most effective way to address growth hormone hypersecretion. It's not just about managing blood sugar. It's about restoring the delicate balance of the entire endocrine system. Regarding other treatments, let's discuss why they may not be beneficial for T1Ds. There are medications like somatostatin analogs, dopamine agonists, and growth hormone receptor antagonists. These are powerful drugs used to lower growth hormone, but they are typically reserved for conditions like acromegaly, where a tumor, often on the pituitary gland, is causing the excess growth hormone production. In type 1 diabetes, where the root cause is insulin deficiency, these medications are generally not the standard treatment unless there's an underlying pituitary issue also at play. In T1Ds, these can lead to other complications like hypoglycemic episodes. As for non-pharmacological strategies, general healthy lifestyle practices that support overall metabolic health are always beneficial. Engaging in regular physical activity can broadly influence hormone regulation, as certain lifestyle factors like body fat percentage have been shown to modulate GH pulsatility. However, there are not specific non-insulin lifestyle interventions proven to directly target and lower growth hormone in T1D in the same way that optimal insulin therapy does. As continuously stated, any dietary or exercise changes should always be carefully managed with a healthcare team to avoid blood sugar imbalances, especially with the risks of hypoglycemia in T1D. All in all, it's really important to remember that the goal isn't just to lower growth hormone, but to restore hormonal balance within the body. Growth hormone plays many vital roles, and suppressing it too much could lead to its own set of problems. For example, growth hormone is a counter-regulatory hormone that helps raise blood sugar. If its effects are overly suppressed, there could be an increased risk of hypoglycemia, as we know, dangerously low blood sugar. Furthermore, observations from studies on growth hormone replacement therapy in GHD patients with T1D have highlighted the delicate balance, showing that GH can impact insulin sensitivity and potentially lead to hyperglycemia, high blood sugar, if not carefully managed. Therefore, any adjustments to therapy must be done under the strict guidance of endocrinologists or a specialized diabetes care team. There are not specific widely adopted clinical guidelines from major organizations like the American Diabetes Association or the Endocrine Society that focus on GH dysregulation as a primary target in T1D, beyond emphasizing excellent glycemic control as the cornerstone of management. This reinforces that managing the underlying diabetes effectively is the key. The relationship between type 1 diabetes and growth hormone is a complex but important piece of the puzzle in understanding the long-term health of individuals with this condition. While elevated growth hormone can contribute to complications, the good news is that the primary and most effective strategy for managing it aligns perfectly with the core principles of T1D care: excellent blood sugar control through optimized insulin therapy. By consistently working with your healthcare team to achieve your glycemic targets, you're not only managing your diabetes day to day, but you're also helping to bring this powerful growth hormone back into balance, supporting your long-term health and well-being. We will provide all the links and resources used to compile this information. I hope this helps. Let's jump back into the wintry slopes of Mount Washington. The only true failure in life is not learning from your past mistakes. Was I dumb for attempting Washington alone with my sense of over-preparation? Yes. Was I dumb for wanting to do it again? Perhaps. But this time, I knew that if I wasn't going to make the summit, it would be for a reason out of my control. Days went by, and so did, at the time, school and work. Every night, I'd check the weekly forecast for Washington. I knew my most available shot would be for a weekend, but I don't get to choose the best days. As it was, day after day, clouds circled around the most notorious mountain for bad weather. More snow kept falling, winds kept whipping, and temperatures kept dropping. Was my first attempt the only chance I'd get? More than 2 weeks after my failed attempt, an upcoming Sunday predicted decent weather. No new snow from the day before, and no storm coming for the day after. I had a window, but the temperatures were predicted to be cold, and the wind was predicted to be intense. Single digits with 20-mile-per-hour winds. Man, what I didn't know was that sounds luxurious compared to the reality of what I was going to face. Seeing the forecast, I confirmed myself for another attempt. Fear was inside of me at every thought throughout this time frame of my life. I really had to work hard to override this fear. I kept asking myself if I could physically accomplish this goal. I knew I could, so I knew I must proceed with another attempt. But it had to be a more intelligent attempt, with more calculated preparation. For what I'd bring with me, I must first conduct an audit of what I brought last time. What worked versus what didn't work? What did I have in my control? First things first, the weight of the pack. And first on that list is heavy winter clothing. That's a difficult one because winter temperatures fluctuate and I need to be prepared for anything. On a bluebird day, most of my heavy layers were in my bag. But what if I faced colder temperatures? I'd have to wear those layers or perish. And I would face colder temperatures. Much colder. To audit the layers in my bag, I thought of the best definition of climbing alpine style, which basically means to bring only the necessary gear and no more. Yet, then I provided a safety buffer. Instead of 2 pairs of backup thermals, I only needed 1, but I still brought some. My hardshell jacket was a must, as well as my insulated jacket, multiple pairs of socks, etc. In actuality, I knew I couldn't cut too much weight off of my layers. This was perhaps the most important, especially seeing the colder forecast. But I was still able to trim some weight off of the total pack weight. I ordered a bag scale to measure sections of everything I was carrying. After my layers, I checked the amount of gear I needed. Helmet, ice axe, crampons, headlamp, ski goggles, boots. As soon as I returned from my failed attempt, I ordered the correct binding for my crampons to match my mountaineering boots. They came within days. To trim weight, I cut out my excess backup headlamps and flashlights as well as my overly heavy summer camping kit. Some things in my bag I just brought because that's what I did on previous hikes and climbs. I did not tailor to the specifics of the expedition. Now, I must. Where I cut most of the weight from my bag was food and liquid. You'll probably laugh when you hear what I originally brought with me. 10 bottles of mini cranberry juice, 15 pouches of juice boxes, a 5-pound bag of trail mix, 10 candy bars, a gallon of water. Looking back at this now, I even laugh at how much of a novice I was. But I commend myself for the amount of information I learned within those few weeks. This was a pivotal moment in my life where I really started to learn how to apply complex carbs and fast-acting sugars to better my performance. Eat complex carbs days before, and take fast-acting sugars with you, but light versions of them. The complex carbohydrates days before give my muscles a sustained fuel source to use during the climb. For 2 reasons, during an intense activity, my blood sugar will go low. One reason is that I always have long-acting, basal, insulin in me to prevent ketones. And the other is the cardiovascular output eventually, for me, outweighs the adrenaline bump to lower my blood sugar about 2 miles into any climb or hike or run for that matter. I want to eat complex carbs days before, so my muscles have that energy already in them. And then, to keep my blood sugar in a safe space during my climb, I intake fast-acting sugars. Instead of the endless amount of bottles and pouches, I fill my Nalgene with electrolyzed sugar water. Instead of candy bars, I opted for electrolyte gel blocks. I still decided on trail mix, but I could tremendously cut down the amount I needed, not 5 pounds. This was the problem. My anxiety about food was my downfall. My biggest fear was running out of sugar, and I needed to realize that bringing too much was hindering me from traveling light and faster. I must admit, it's difficult to overcome an anxiety like this, especially as a T1D. We don't want to run out of anything that is life-saving for us. On my failed attempt, I brought enough insulin pens with me to last 4 months, and then they all went to waste after I opened my bag to find them frozen. Not only did I now need to keep them warm, but I also didn't need to bring so much for a day trip. I was preparing for the end of the world, and not looking at what was required of me to accomplish this goal. Things could go wrong. I could find myself in a survival situation where I need insulin and/or food. But what would suit me better is how I handled the situation from an intelligent and decisive perspective, as opposed to just bringing it along only to weigh me down and put me in a more dangerous situation. As I write this, I know currently I don't know it all, but I do feel like I am lecturing my younger self, which is good. This means that at least in terms of my sport, I have progressed, and I hope this means that I'll continue to progress. In the future, I may lecture myself at this current moment. When all was said and done, I got my pack down to 35 to 40 pounds. I was comfortable with this, especially in winter. I had all of my essentials. I grew a trust within to be okay with the amount of food, more specifically sugar, that I was to bring on this next attempt. I had enough for what would contain my mileage and elevation gain, and I had enough of a buffer to factor in either more exertion or a situation where I needed to last out there longer than my planned day. With a newfound confidence, yet still an immense amount of fear, I was ready for my second attempt at Mount Washington, alone in the winter as the T1D. As the end of the week kept creeping up, forecasts shifted the winds to pick up and the temperature to get colder. That Sunday came, and I was concerned about the resting single-digit temps dropping to 0 and below without factoring in the wind chill. 6:30 a.m. After waking up at 2 a.m., eating breakfast and driving, I found myself in the parking lot of Pinkham Notch. The heat in my car was no help. The cold was nipping at the windows. My car read 2 degrees Fahrenheit, and I thought this was good. The temp would rise with the sun. But when I walked into Pinkham Notch Visitor Center to converse with the staff, I found out that it was only to get colder throughout the day, and windier. One person said it could get to minus 40. Make sure you're prepared. And prepared I was. Yes, this did alarm me. I knew the minus 40 would most likely be for a portion. The temperature elsewhere above tree line may only be minus 15 or 20. No matter how I try to put it, this is fucking cold weather. But I knew I had all of the gear I needed to face this head on. A drive inside of me told me I was prepared. Stay collected. Make smart decisions. You turned around before, and it is okay to turn around again. There are groups and other climbers going up, so play it smart and take each step as it goes. You got this. Be safe. The Lionhead Winter Route is an 8-mile out and back climb with a total of 4,250 feet of elevation gain. As opposed to the summer route, the winter workaround dodges avalanche-prone areas by traversing up a bypass ledge which gains 1,000 feet of elevation gain in around a mile. This portion begins around 2 miles into the climb after branching off the Tuckerman's Ravine Trail. The Lionhead Winter Route takes you to none other than the Lionhead, which is a unique landmark resembling the name it has been given. The next steepest part is the summit cone of Mount Washington, to the summit, which is more than 600 feet of elevation gain in a half mile where I turned around previously. All in all, in winter conditions, these are very steep portions. But between the Lionhead and the summit cone, the roughly half-mile less steep stretch at higher terrain in the frozen alpine garden attracts just the right conditions to become a magnet for wind. Back at Pinkham Notch, I made my first step towards the summit at 7:30 a.m. I prepared so well for the gear and fuel that I was bringing with me, and I knew what I needed to do to manage my blood sugar during the climb. But at this point in my climbing career, I did not know how to properly prepare my blood glucose before a climb. I figured While eating breakfast before and on my drive, I'd give less insulin to carbs, hoping that I'd then naturally start at a higher number, which would then be brought down naturally by exertion. This theory somewhat worked, but not for the better. During my drive, my blood glucose rose to above 300 milligrams per deciliter, 16.7 millimoles per liter. Yet, by the time the insulin life was complete, they decreased to 187 milligrams per deciliter, 10.4 millimoles per liter. This is a good starting number for me to begin an intense climb with, but the massive spike before was not good. My mind was not only battling fear and anxiety, but now it was battling a buzz of a blood sugar spike that it was not used to. Since this climb, I've learned that having a bagel as part of my breakfast did not work for me. Today, before a huge day of exertion, I'm no longer afraid to let my insulin life completely run through. I'll give the necessary amount of insulin with a whole grain carbohydrate like Honey Nut Cheerios with eggs and Greek yogurt. 15 minutes before I begin my activity, I then eat a fruit like a banana or an apple. I supply my body with carbohydrates as a long-sustaining source of energy, especially from the night before, of a heavy complex carb dinner, and then before the activity, I get my blood sugar up with fast-acting, natural sugars to prevent a low for the first few miles, knowing that I'll have to continuously fuel a few miles in, to then prevent lows and keep my blood sugar above a certain threshold. Back to my first mistake on this Washington solo. It was in the back of my mind that I'd continue to make mistakes. Yet, I told myself that my blood sugar is where I want it in this exact moment. I cannot worry about where it was. I must focus on the present and prepare for what's in front of me. This is the art of the game. A quarterback cannot sulk on an interception. And because a quarterback throws an interception, this does not mean that he has lost the game. This game that I'm playing, however, has the very severe consequences of life and death. For my own safety, I must remain vigilant. I ate some energy gels before I began, and the first 2 miles to the base of the Lionhead winter route went smoothly. My blood sugar had a little bump from my snacks, but the 1,400 feet of elevation gain within 1.8 miles flattened it out to be around 175 milligrams per deciliter, 9.7 millimoles per liter, before the trail got even steeper. This was a great warm-up for what was to come. Within those first few miles, I warmed up quickly. I couldn't feel much of the wind because I was surrounded by the trees. This portion is everything you would imagine a winter wonderland to be. Snow-covered pines, frozen waterfalls, views of the exposed ridges above. Hell, I wouldn't question if I saw a penguin and Santa on his sled ride by. I love this sense of Northwoods wilderness. Mount Washington and the White Mountains in the winter are some of the most gorgeous settings I've ever been in. Then, the tough part began. I've been here before a few weeks ago. The stretch up to Lionhead turned winter hiking into mountaineering. The first bit of cold I felt was on my fingertips when I took my gloves off to strap my crampons in. The correct crampons this time. I swapped my hiking poles for my ice axe. I knew this section would be steep, but I reminded myself that if I went up with focus and paid attention to my footing, then the section would go by quicker than anticipated. I had a little more fruit, a few candy gummies, and my electrolyte sugared water from one of my Nalgene's. I learned quickly that I needed to put my water bottles in my bag and wrap them in my backup layers due to the cold. Even with this trick, my Nalgene cap was frozen and took a little force to open. I managed to do it though, and decided to put hand warmers next to both water bottles. Conveniently, I put hand warmers next to my small amount of extra insulin that was not on my person. Without these hand warmers, both my water and my extra insulin would have froze. Since then, I have learned better ways to manage this scenario by keeping all insulin on my body via a vest, and keeping my water in insulated sleeves specifically designed for this amount of cold. Now, with my warm-up fading away, and my small break sending the frigid air back into my body, I was ready to get on the move again. Crisp breaths, clunky steps from my gear and layers, goggles on from start to finish. Let's continue on. The spikes from my crampons dove into the angled cliff edge. still in the trees, there was only straight and up to go. Already, I felt stronger due to my pack being lighter. It took me roughly an hour and 15 minutes to climb the mile up the winter route to the Lionhead landmark. Surprisingly and comfortably, my blood sugar stayed in a decent range where I did not have to fret on it much. Once more, I no longer felt cold. My body was heating up so much from the steep climb and the layers that I feared my sweat freezing. The higher up I got, the smaller the trees got, and by the time I made it to the Lionhead, I was in exposed wind. Right below the Lionhead, I ducked down for a quick break. It was here that I ran into two groups of people. One small group passed by me and went on their way towards the summit cone. The other group of 5 or so people told me they just turned around. The wind was so strong that they believed frostbite was a serious concern, which it was. This group had every reason to turn around. The second anyone senses too much danger is the best time to not risk it. For me, however, I was feeling good at this point. I saw the smaller group go ahead of me, so I told myself if they turn around, then I should consider it. The temperature at this point was most likely between -5 and -15 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind was about to pick up beyond the Lionhead. The predicted wind for the day would track 35 to 50 miles per hour with gusts up to 65 to 75 miles per hour. I knew I could manage the 35 to 50 mile per hour winds head on, but I'd have to stay strong through the gusts and hope that they did not last long. I was about 1 full mile away from the summit, yet I knew that the next half mile would be the wind tunnel, which would then bring me to the summit cone where I turned around last time. I just needed to get by this wind tunnel quickly, and then I could assess whether to push on up to the summit. This was to be the most dangerous part of the climb. I knew this from the few weeks before that it's the most exposed. Yet, that was during a bluebird day. Today, the wind is whipping the clouds around, and the air is so cold that there's a misty haze. Visibility is decent, but it's definitely not a sunny, windless day. I'd be spending 1 mile up and 1 mile back before the opportunity for safe protection, obviously without wanting to rely on the structures at the summit. This mile would have almost 1,300 feet of elevation gain included in it. At this moment, my blood sugar was around 155 milligrams per deciliter or 8.6 millimoles per liter. I knew in this next section that I wouldn't be able to manually check my numbers. To this point, my CGM was accurate, so I needed to rely on that. Even more so, I didn't want to have to pause to look at my CGM often, so I knew I was better off sugaring up to prevent any risk of a low in this section. Before I got cold again, I fueled up and took off. Boom! The wind slapped me off my feet. My goggles began to frost. I walked across this half-mile wind tunnel stretch like a stormtrooper in a sandstorm. The wind was whipping the snow in every which way direction. I could see the frozen trail marked out in front of me, only 30 or so feet at a time. I put my head down and just focused, step by step. Adrenaline poured into my system, and no longer was I worrying about what my numbers were. My thought process narrowed down to one concept: get to the summit cone and out of this wind tunnel. I was trying to go fast, but the wind kept slowing me down. All of a sudden, a massive gust stopped me in my tracks. Every fiber of my muscles were focused solely on standing in place and not being blown away. The wind was the only sound roaring in my ears, like a freight train about to ram right into me. The wind let up, and I moved forward at a pace that I thought was fast, but was at least faster than nothing at all. This was the first moment in my life where I knew I was in a situation where my survival needs were greater than just checking in on my blood sugar. I needed to make sure no skin was exposed. I needed to make sure I was still on the trail. I needed to make sure that I was on my way to cover. Still, with all of this worry in my head, I held the confidence to continue on. With my layers, I was in shock of the cold force, but I wasn't cold. I wasn't out of breath, and I knew that my blood glucose was above 150, 8.3, At that point, I didn't even realize that I felt the force of minus 40 degrees. As soon as I was moving again, boom, another gust. Stop. Hold on strong. Wait. Minus 40 again. Winds calm down. Move forward. Boom, another gust. Repeat. This happened all the way to the summit cone. As soon as I got to where I turned around last time, I noticed a large rock I could take cover behind. The noise stopped. Silence sank in. Throughout the rush of the wind and the excitement of the climb thus far, I nearly forgot I was alone. My mind was having such a strong conversation with itself on risk management and calculated decision-making that it wasn't until I got through that tunnel of hell that I even acknowledged how alone I felt. If something happened to me here, it would be one difficult rescue. And this was the exact spot where I turned around last time. Now, yes, I was exhausted. And yes, my mind was shot from relatively higher blood sugar since 3 a.m. But I made it to the same point I did a few weeks before, and I felt stronger. My numbers were in a good position. I trusted my CGM, so I didn't have to worry about exposed skin. And better yet, that small party that passed in front of me, I haven't seen them, which to me means they did not turn around yet. If people were able to summit the mountain in these conditions, I could do it. I was so focused on the mission at hand. Did I have enough sugar to fuel my summit push? Was I warm enough? How's my insulin doing? I didn't use any so far, besides my basal insulin from last night and a lighter load of mealtime bolus earlier this morning. But I did not want any of it to freeze in case I needed some. Check, check, check. I status checked myself and went through all of the items on the list in my mind. I don't know how I got into this position so quickly, but here and now, once more, yet for the first time, I had the opportunity to attempt the summit push. Up the summit cone I went, just me and my T1D. My blood glucose read 174 milligrams per deciliter, 9.7 millimoles per liter, at the start of the final half-mile push. I had 600 feet of elevation gain to go, step by slow step. The wind on the cone existed, but not nearly as bad as the tunnel. At this moment, with the wind chill factor, the temperature was realistically bouncing between minus 20 and minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Right below the summit, that party of two greeted me. They were on their way down. "Almost there," one of them yelled. "You're insane, but so are we." Out of the misty haze, the trail dissipated into the frozen parking lot of the auto road. I followed the crunched-in steps from in front of me up to the wooden steps. Structures appeared as if I was a scuba diver in the ocean witnessing a shipwreck. The buildings and towers on top of the summit. In the summer, this would be filled with vacationers in sandals, holding ice cream cones and fiddling around to find the keys from the car that they drove up, or tourists taking pictures along the cog railway. This, Mount Washington, could not possibly be the same one. I felt as though I just reached a research facility in Antarctica, which, considering the work the observatory does, is not far off with the conditions of the day. I knew there were scientists somewhere behind all of the concrete storm-protected walls, but not a single soul moved. I strutted my way up the final steps to the summit of Mount Washington, New Hampshire. Yes, I was alone. Through the thick fog, I could see a small party behind me approaching from the Lake of the Clouds and the Almanusic Ravine side. Catching my breath as I made it to the infamous sign, my goggles frosted again. I could not see anything. To fix the situation, I quickly removed them to wipe off the frost. Sweat poured out from my face and instantly froze on my jacket. I did not want to fool around long enough to find out what would happen to my skin, so I maneuvered my goggles back into place immediately. At the summit, it felt warmer than the tunnel of wind I just went through. The next day, I looked at the statistics to find that at the time I made it to the summit, it was minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Warmer than the tunnel of wind I just went through. Minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit felt warm. From the point between Lionhead to the summit cone, the extreme wind brought the temperature and wind chill factor to minus 40 degrees. While standing on that summit, in my chest, I felt a sense of fear combined with a sense of accomplishment. What the hell did I just do? I did it. As a type 1 diabetic, I managed to safely climb one of the most notorious mountains for horrible weather in the heart of winter conditions. This summit accomplishment changed me for many reasons. For one, it was the most rugged feat I've ever accomplished at that time. By February 2021, 2.5 years after my T1D diagnosis, I've been on some serious climbs and hikes across the country, but nothing remotely close to the subarctic conditions I faced that day. At 11 a.m., standing at the summit, my blood sugar rose to a mere 189 milligrams per deciliter, 10.5 millimoles per liter. I knew that it would start to go back down soon as I started moving again. Jumping to today, I may not be satisfied with how high my numbers were throughout that day, but at that moment, on the summit of Washington in February 2021, I was comfortably in a safe margin of glucose range that allowed me to carry out this subarctic adventure. Before I started down, the party coming up from the other side of the mountain made their way to the summit. They offered to take a picture of me and congratulated me on the solo achievement. I did not mention to them that I had T1D. Once more, I proved to myself that I could accomplish what I knew was possible. I made it to the summit in 3.5 hours. This was a stark contrast to my previous attempt. Not only did I move faster, but I didn't even focus on what was in my pack because it did not weigh me down. I didn't even have a thought about my equipment because it all worked properly. I learned that when I prepared well, I did not have to worry about what was going wrong because everything was in a position to not go wrong. I only had to focus on the task at hand, my safety, and my blood sugars. My day wasn't over as I leaped down the summit cone and back to the exposed area. Once again, it was cold, it was windy, and it was treacherous. But because I was heading down this ramp section, I went through it really fast. I made it to the protection of the Lion Head. Going down the winter route back to the main Tuckerman's Ravine Trail, I did not slip and slide all over the place this time. I went slowly with my ice axe balancing me. My pack did not topple me over, and I made it down safely. From there, it was smooth sailing to my car. One funny thing that happened was after the climb. I reserved a room at a local motel, so I didn't have to drive such a long distance back after being exhausted. When I pulled into the parking lot of this family-run motel, no lights were on and all the doors were locked. I was cold and tired at this point. Even though it was warmer, perhaps 10 degrees Fahrenheit, I no longer had all of my layers on. I was just in my sweaty base layers. I called the owner of the motel and discovered that I accidentally reserved a night for the following week, and the owner was on vacation far away from New Hampshire. I had to then drive more than 3 hours back home. After figuring out the plan to actually go back home and to break in North Conway, I tanked some coffee and blasted music to stay awake. Earlier that morning, I woke up at 2 a.m. I did not make it back home until 10 p.m., and after a massive dinner at 10 p.m., I did not fall asleep until 11:30 p.m. This was one long, intense day of endurance. There's another funny aspect of this climb. I didn't start dating my now fiancé for another 5 months. But that same Sunday that I was alone climbing on Mount Washington, she was at a nearby ski resort. We weren't but 10 miles apart from each other, yet with two totally different experiences. I believe in a higher power at play, and that's part of what drives me to improve my performance in the mountains. This expedition was a major learning lesson. Even with the accomplishment, there were many things that I did not do right, including focusing on my blood glucose before the climb. I still used some candies and fast-acting sugar that didn't contain as much electrolytes as I now carry. And the method I carried my insulin was very much risking it to freeze. The amount of exposed time was around 5.5 hours, which is not a huge amount of time, but plenty enough for it to be dangerous if something were to go wrong. Yet, when all is said and done, this was a step in the right direction. I knew I could now accomplish anything as a T1D if I managed an intense climb through subarctic temperatures alone. I had a vision, and I went after it. This attempt was more calculated and thought through. I believe that is why it was successful, even when encountered with those conditions. I've learned a lot since that climb, but it was that day that helped sharpen the blade for me to become so rigid in my routines now. This was a piece to the puzzle of me getting to where I want to go. And obviously, I'm still learning, and I still need to get to places. The journey continues, and when confronted with minus 40 degrees again in the future, I know I can physically confront it while properly managing my T1D. Calculated decision making. Build trust within yourself. Don't fret on those mistakes. Just focus on the present and the next steps in front of you. You will get there. With this point of view, I know I will get there. Thank you for coming along on this adventure with me. I appreciate you listening to today's episode of the T1Determined Podcast. I hope you learned a lot and had a fun time along the way. Stay tuned for some awesome T1D athlete guests on upcoming episodes. The journey is just beginning. If this episode resonated with you, please share it. Every share helps us reach more people who need to hear these stories and understand the science behind T1D and peak performance. For all our content, including details on our upcoming documentary, Low Blood Sugar at High Altitude, please visit T1Determined.net. Connect with us on social media. Find us on Instagram, TikTok, and X at T1D_endurance, and Facebook at T1Determined. We will have announcements soon on our expansion to more social platforms. Until next time, keep pushing your limits. I hope this helps. Stay strong, stay determined. T1 Determined.